So it's a good afternoon to all of you colleagues. My name is Thabo Msibi. As I said earlier, I will be chairing this afternoon session. And I do know that sessions that happen after lunch have a tendency of drawing a limited number of people and people being tired, but we're going to try and make this as lively as possible. This session is focused on collaborative online international learning, and we've got a fantastic lineup of experts who've done tremendous work in the area of COIL. We have, I think I'm going to do it in the order that they are seated in. Dr. Devania Jitu, who is a specialist in international education at the Durban University of Technology. She's got extensive experience in higher education and internationalization with a focus on internationalization of the curriculum. She has developed specialized expertise in international virtual engagement specifically, as well as the COIL initiatives, more specifically, and its approach towards inclusive internationalization. She has served also as co-chair of the UNESCO Chair on Intercultural Competence at the Stellenbosch University. She holds a PhD in Higher Education Studies from UWC, and her research interests focus on global structural dynamics of academic cross-border collaboration. Let's give Dr. Jitu a round of applause, please. Our second panelist is Dr. Laverne Samuel, and I think many of you also know this familiar face as well. He is a global leader in the field of internationalization of higher education. He is quite sought after across the globe for his work on international education, and I must say, I was in Sweden, I think 2 or 3 months ago, and guess what I found being a keynote speaker in that event? His approach to inclusive internationalization and the innovative integration of international virtual exchange and COIL has earned him global recognition. He is by profession a dental surgeon and a medical scientist who's got an interest in oral medicine and the broader public health space. Currently, he serves as the Director of International Education and Partnerships at the Durban University of Technology. He's also the President of the International Education Association of South Africa and has been President of a number of other organizations, both in South Africa and indeed abroad, including SANOD. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Samuel, and I think I want to make one last mention that he recently got or received a BMI Global Education or Times Higher Lifetime Achievement Award for outstanding contributions to internationalization, which is awarded in the 2024 NAFSA conference. Welcome. And last but not least, seated at the far end is my dear friend, Dr. Casey, and I was trying to practice the surname, the pronunciation. I said Dinga or Dinja. He says neither. I have to say Dinga. So I hope I got it right, Casey. Great. Wonderful. He has deeply, he has interests in values that promote an understanding of other people's perspectives and experiences in critically analyzing internalized belief systems and positionalities. He's got a passion for intercultural and global learning, as well as how it informs daily practice, centering on critical feeling and teaching, faculty development, as well as research in international education. He serves as the Executive and Academic Director for the Internationalization Office at the University of Denver and leads initiatives related to internationalization at home, such as the COIL initiative, as well as managing the intercultural education coursework with more than 800 students who participate in it annually. Dr. Denga has been active in the European Association of International Educators, the Association of International Educator Administrators, and has facilitated workshops and seminars on internationalization of the curriculum, global learning, COIL, faculty development, and intercultural education in a variety of conferences and institutions. And of course, those of you who were with us yesterday would have been part of his workshop focus on COIL, which is absolutely fantastic, and we learned so much from that. He's got more than 15 years of experience within the higher education space, and he holds a PhD in comparative international development education from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Dr. Denga. So if you don't mind, colleagues, I'm going to take a seat, because what we would like to do is to have a conversation as opposed to a presentation format around COIL. We don't want to bore you with presentations in the afternoon. So rather, let's converse. And the format is such that I will pose a question, I'll ask panelists to respond to the question. It's going to be in 3 segments, and then at the end, we'll invite conversations from the audience and questions from the audience at that point. So maybe let's start off this way. Colleagues, can you tell me, we're speaking about COIL, and some of our audience members may not even know what this COIL is that we're talking about. What is this COIL that we're talking about? And how is it representing your own unique context where you're located? And so how does it also support your broader mission within your institutions?
Can I start?
You can start.
Okay. So I think COIL, as we all know, is collaborative online international learning. And I think the acronym really spells out what it is. It's about being collaborative. It's about using the virtual space. It's about international classrooms, international academics getting together. And at the end of it all, it's a pedagogy. So it is a pedagogy that is mediated through technology. Having said that, COIL comes by a number of names. COIL was the classical approach used by the State University of New York to develop what initially started as telecollaboration. But it has gone by other names. In the UK, it's referred to as OIL, and that's largely because COIL means something different in the UK. It's a type of contraception in the UK, which is not quite the message we wanted to put it across. But these days, the word virtual exchange is used. It's a broader term, and COIL is one type of virtual exchange. But for me, it's more than the definition. It's what it represents. It represents a movement from types of internationalization that have over the years been exclusive, elitist, and to large numbers of our students and our staff, elusive. This represents something that is inclusive, inviting, and embracing. It allows us to take internationalization to scale. It's economical. And I think more than anything, it is a dynamic, creative, innovative, and evolving field that allows us to give expression to our curriculum in in ways that would be impossible if we were to rely on just mobility and the more demanding forms of internationalization in terms of our resources. So I'll end there and let the other panelists continue.
Maybe I can just add to it from the DUT perspective. I think this also gives us an opportunity to address some of the myths about COIL, this question. And I think it's good to start with what COIL is not. So it's not a module, it's not a course, it's not a program or some other term you may have heard. It's also not an added extra to what you are doing. COIL is an activity within an already approved and running module. So the activities that you are working on within your plan for the year is what you can modify for collaboration, for meaningful interaction, engagement, and collaboration for your students. It's a technology-supported transformative method of education delivery that translates into a collaborative way of internalizing information. And I think for our context, as much as South Africa is a multicultural society, we also come with a complex history that requires our education methods to support the development of graduates who are interculturally competent and able to work within our increasing globally interrelated society. What we've seen and seen must be purposeful is that we should align it with pedagogy such as Frere's humanizing pedagogy, pedagogy of the heart, and also pedagogies like pedagogy of collapse, which supports the broader mission of the university, which is to creatively and innovatively produce adaptive graduates who value tolerance, mutuality, and diversity while being adaptive and resilient as well. And I think in terms of incentives for academics, because this is one of the questions we get quite a lot with some of the US institutions incentivizing through funding. For us, in our context, the incentive is for our academic staff to contribute to the transformation agenda of the higher education sector in South Africa and Africa.
Switch those on. It wasn't. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. All right. So I think what I would add, I mean, they've said, I think, a very good summary of what it is already. I think one of the things that's really beneficial about COIL is that it not only centers the content, right, disciplinary content, but it also centers that intercultural learning, right, which we don't necessarily have in traditional classrooms. It might be, but often it's not. But when you've got this sort of collaborative learning, COIL and other kinds of virtual exchange allow for that centering in the classroom to be talking about that intercultural outcomes as well, and how that connects with the content that they're working with. The other thing I think, because they've talked really much about sort of the classroom aspects of it, but for the academics as well, it creates new pathways for broadening their own networks, right? Having new collaborations. One of the things that I tend to talk about a lot is that as academics, we spend a lot of time collaborating on research, and we spend very little time collaborating on teaching, right? Just in general, particularly across institutional boundaries. Within institutions, there's more of it, but across institutional boundaries, it just doesn't happen that often. And so this is an opportunity to create and strengthen networks and give students opportunities to connect with people they wouldn't be able to connect to otherwise, and expand their networks for all the reasons that could be beneficial for them.
So, Tabo, if I can add to that, we in our experience have found that while this might have started off as a pedagogy that was focused on particular types of learning in the classroom, it has become a potent staff development tool that our academics develop as much as our students do. And it really is a focus on the transformational aspects of internationalization as opposed to the transactional. And it allows that two-way bridge of exchange between the local and the global in profound ways. Often, we've heard in the last presentation how unequal relations can be in partnerships. And COIL is a great leveler. It's a great leveler in going into it without the need for being well-resourced. And you go in there taking everything from your culture, your background, and for me, it's about bringing the human element back into internationalization. So it's hugely transformational, and I think for us, hugely impactful. At DUT, it's really changed the face of internationalization. As a small institution that has grown now into one that is competitive, being ranked, engaging in research at a higher level, this brand of internationalization has opened doors for us, both in terms of our students shaping those adaptive graduates, but also having our staff engage in the local context, the global context, and understanding the inextricable link between the different contexts.
I mean, this is really, really interesting in terms of the sort of the transformative power that you're speaking about. You know, transforming pedagogy, transforming the institution itself. And maybe I'm going to step off the questions just for 2 seconds, because I think for somebody who's sitting in the audience and they want something sort of tangible, what have you guys done tangibly within your space to ensure that COIL is implemented? I mean, what are some of the tangible things that somebody who's sitting here would, you know, may do to try and introduce COIL in their spaces?
Firstly, I'd like to say it has to be an organic process. It takes a while, but you've got to socialize your community into what COIL offers and how COIL can be implemented. So one of the first things we started was about staff development and capacity development in Iran. We had to create that confidence for people to be able to do it, and that supportive, facilitative environment is very, very important. It's not easy initially because you don't have all the tools, but the world has changed and there's so much out there that you can give access to your staff to in terms of capacity development. And we've now developed tools of our own that we can use. We don't necessarily have to go to the outside, but we also believe it's important not to be insular. So some of our training happens on the outside, but you know, a large core happens within the institution. But I think once you've done that, for me to embed it into strategy is what's important, so that it actually is something that is on the agenda, not just of the International Office or the DVC Teaching and Learning, but every academic chair, every head of department, every dean, everyone should be thinking about it, including those in the research arena, because the scholarship of COIL is just as important as the pedagogy.
Brilliant. Other examples here? Okay, go ahead, please. No?
Yeah, perhaps I can just add to the professional development part in that a tangible way of, you know, because people can participate in professional development and then they just leave it to the wayside. But I think bringing the fair partnership principles into the professional development and partnering along the way of the professional development, you come out with a tangible COIL project that people could use. And that then has that snowball effect for other academics to see, oh, okay, this is actually how it could work. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that, this idea of cultivating faculty champions that are within various units, because sometimes you can have a unit that's really interested in COIL and you get 2 or 3 faculty members and they're all working on it, but the rest of the institution isn't familiar with it and it becomes siloed. And one of the things that is I think particularly transformative about COIL is the possibility of doing interdisciplinary work, where you have 2 different lenses from 2 different disciplines coming together from 2 different institutions. So not only do you have the cultural lenses and backgrounds and the differences, but you also have different disciplinary lenses. And so if you are cultivating faculty members across various schools, colleges that you have, then you can have that interdisciplinary conversation at your home institution about what you're experiencing in ways that you can really only do with other folks that are doing interdisciplinary kind of work, right? And so making sure that you're cultivating various champions in different colleges or schools across the institution is one way to do it. I think the other thing that's really important, and given the work that my colleagues have done here, I'm sure that they would agree, is how do we help institutions that haven't done anything with COIL start developing as well. That professional development for the field is critical because there's still a very small number of academics that have engaged in COIL. And so it's partly our job to also provide resources and development for institutions that have not done anything with COIL for all sorts of reasons, right? But I think, you know, we set up systems and structures within our own institution, and DUT in particular has been really leaders in that field, in that area. But we have a responsibility to also work with others to make sure that if they've got the desire or interest, that we provide some of that professional development and starting for them so that they can start on that journey as well.
So It's interesting, looking at this, the professional development of faculty, academics, mainstreaming and ensuring also in relation to strategy that this happens. But a key component that we've heard from the panel and we often read about is the potential that COIL offers in relation to this border crossing. The idea that you no longer have to now do that physical travel if you're doing sort of international education. In what ways has COIL enriched your own experience? I mean, I'm just thinking about, in our context in South Africa, so many inequalities, that idea of having to pay for students, for example, to go to the US, to go to the UK, the potential that is there within COIL.
I think for me, it's important to see COIL as one of the modalities where you can deliver internationalization to scale. And that makes it a game changer. I think mobility should always be on the cards. It's not something we should remove, but we should also be very, very clear in how much of it we can do. And our figures speak for themselves. Europe, which has the best funded mobility program in the world, has never gone beyond 20% mobility. After COVID, that was halved. The US, the biggest economy in the world, was 7 to 9% before COVID, now at 3.5%. On our continent, it's 1% at its best and under 1% generally. So us getting involved in COIL is a commitment to the other 99%, and we should never lose focus on that. The ability to deliver important graduate attributes, important aspects of our learning outcomes that every student deserves, not just the student who's able to undertake a physical mobility. And that commitment to deliver on your graduate attributes is what makes COIL so special as a modality. And you will get resistance. When I took COIL to DUT 10 years ago, I had the support of the Vice-Chancellor and the Deputy Vice-Chancellor. But my colleagues, and I had just come out of a dean's position, the other dean said to me, come on, this is a cop-out. we just don't have the money to send our students, so you have invented this to bring our numbers up. But you have to be persistent. If you believe in the modality, you have to be persistent. And fortunately, we've had successive vice-chancellors that have supported it, successive deputy vice-chancellors that have supported it. And now, every dean is chasing us to get their COIL numbers up. And I have to say, at DUT now, we have more than 150 COIL modules, projects a year. And that is over our 6 faculties, even the ones that resisted. And it's across 6 continents, which is even more important. It brings diversity into your partnerships that you're not always able to achieve. And it's probably a good opportunity for me to share this with you. We have struggled to keep our percentage of African partnerships going, but we have decided this is going to be the way that we do it. And a month ago, we launched AfriCOIL. We are taking COIL across the African continent for international virtual exchange within Africa and with Africa. So for me, that is very exciting. We don't want to go just from 150 to 200 projects without taking the rest of the continent with us. So this AfriCOIL initiative is going to allow us to diversify our partnerships, but take internationalization across the continent. And when you do this, it opens doors, like Casey said, to other forms of internationalization. Researchers coming together, curriculum champions coming together, having engagement projects happen together, applying for funding together. It just builds a stronger base. And I think for me, that is why my passion for COIL and virtual exchange continues to grow, and my commitment continues to grow.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah.
I think for me, as a COIL coordinator, what we're seeing with students and faculty members is that, it's a tool to foster a dynamic learning environment, emphasizing intercultural collaboration and inclusivity. I think that intercultural competence comes through with the COIL enabling students and academics to engage across diverse backgrounds, broadening their perspectives on global issues, and then bringing it back home and translating it for themselves to internalize that in a diverse way. But it also improves the digital literacy that equips students with essential skills for effective virtual collaboration. So in the era of the 4IR and transitioning into the 5IR and working with Generation Z and X, and I don't know how many more we're going to have to work with, digital literacy extends to responsible computing also and fair partnership within that. We're working within the digital divide, right? The COIL principles really support this initiative, and it promotes global problem solving, encouraging students to tackle real world challenges by collaborating with each other and experiencing each other's challenges as well. And also, in my experience, I think COIL serves as a valuable tool to support the neurodiversity that we're seeing in our universities and is being acknowledged within our universities. It provides adaptable learning formats that cater to different learning needs, and it ensures students have equitable access to a distinctive education experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would add a couple things. One, so our institution is the exception to the rule in terms of physical mobility. We send over 70% of our undergraduates on study abroad on a physical exchange, and our institution is very privileged in being able to do that. But even if someone studies abroad in the very traditional mobility format, that doesn't mean that their intercultural learning is somehow complete. So taking part in COIL initiatives, even if it's one, multiple, intercultural learning, this global perspective taking is a lifelong skill. And so even if you have students that have gone on mobility, the idea that, well, if they've done that, it's the checkbox, they've had that experience. No, they can still learn more and gain more, and the faculty members can still learn more and gain more through that as well. So I think that's one thing to think about, is that COIL offers a very immersive, intimate kind of way to connect on projects that sometimes students might not have, even if they do have a physical mobility experience, right? And the other thing is about thinking about faculty and how they engage in the work. It really offers them an opportunity to develop global mindset as well. And you asked how it's enriched our institution. I think when you think of traditional methods of internationalizing the curriculum, often we think of, or in practice it has been, sitting down maybe with a facilitator, but maybe by yourself, and thinking about how you can change your curriculum. It's a very isolated process, unless there's some sort of initiative across an entire unit or something like that. But it tends to be a very lonely process. But once you get COIL involved, the faculty member gets excited because they have somebody else as a partner to work with to develop things curricularly. And it is much more enticing for them because they can automatically see the value, even if they don't have a global mindset or an international outlook. When they get together with someone else in a cross-border, cross-cultural context, there's this intrinsic motivation that even if it's challenging to do it, they're much more motivated than what I see in the traditional internationalizing curriculum format. And so when I work with my faculty members in traditional versions of internationalizing curriculum, some of them are interested, some of them want to do it, but they're like, they don't have enough time, there's all these other things. When I introduced COIL, all sorts of people are excited. And that excitement is really important because internationalizing the curriculum is one of the most challenging things to do in internationalization.
Yeah. If I could add one point, and that is around networks. One of the strategic objectives at DUT is to be an engaged university. The types of networks that we've been able to harness and leverage off COIL have been unbelievable. For example, we did training for the Matariki group of universities. These are 9 research-intensive universities that would probably never look at us as a partner. But our expertise in COIL opened doors for us. We were able to train them, and we now have networks with this group of universities who are able to see in a very different way that you might not have to be exactly who they are to be a viable partner. But I want to extend that to the students as well. It is the start of them developing networks for their profession. I mean, imagine, Professor James, if your teaching students start having partnerships with teachers around the world.
We're doing this already.
Yes. But what I'm saying is, with COIL, everybody gets to do that.
Yeah.
And, you know, having 5, you know, colleagues around the world while you're a professional allows you to develop those professional networks going forward. So, you know, I read something yesterday that said collaboration is the new competition. And I really believe in that. And I think that collaboration starts with activities like COIL that allow our students to start collaborating and for our staff and our institution to deepen their collaboration.
So, Dr. Samuel, let me pick the conversation from that point of collaboration. Yesterday, during the workshop that we had facilitated by Dr. Dinga there, a key issue that emerged was around the challenges around connectivity in Africa, for example. And one colleague made an example of trying to upload a document at the airport and taking 3 hours for the document to be uploaded onto the internet. And so we are talking about the importance of this collaboration, but we're also aware that there are these other challenges that come into play when one is developing a COIL. So could you maybe speak to some of the challenges that you've encountered in the process of your work course? For example, the technological, cultural, as well as the third one that I had mentioned here, logistical, as a dimension.
Well, I think firstly, the digital divide is a real one. The cost of data in Africa, for example, is so much higher than the rest of the world. Devices are not easily available. There are bandwidth issues. So we have found ways of actually going beyond that. So we have many asynchronous sessions that can actually be accessed when you perhaps have data available. We look at low bandwidth software programs that are not as data driven as some of the other programs that we have. In terms of intercultural competence, we always have an engagement that prepares both the staff member and the student for that intercultural experience. So there are many ways of bridging the gap. And I think that bridging the gap for me has become one of the fundamental mandates of universities. We live in a world that is just so, it's characterized by conflict, contestation, major geopolitical shifts. Universities have that role to be bridges in society. And those bridges are things that we have to start with within our partnerships. And I think it's a unique moment in our history where universities have to play this role of being global hubs of scholars, scholarship and engagement that take people-to-people engagement to a new level in areas where governments are no longer able to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, let's go ahead.
If I can just add, I think picking up on what Dr. Samuels has said about the challenges, it's very important for us as international educators, and when I say international educators, I'm talking about academic staff and us as professional staff in international offices, to have these conversations and the open dialogue about what it is we're experiencing, and also to encourage our students to voice those challenges so that it's not one partner being overbearing. I think we must acknowledge in our academic partnerships, whether it's South-North or South-South, given South Africa's positionality within the continent, that we live within the digital divide. You know, Dr. Samuels mentioned the inexcusable high costs of data. We think we struggle here in South Africa. I mean, some of our partners on the continent, it's really $10 for 1 gig of data. I mean, students are not going to be able to afford that. So that balance between the synchronous and the asynchronous and having that conversation between the partners is very important. But I think having said this and acknowledging the challenges that us as academics and students experience, what we have seen at DUT is that the students don't see the virtual space as a limiting space to creating meaningful connections and networks. I mean, in some of our orientations, we've had to have some conversations and explain to, you know, like, boys, this is not the space to go out and look for your wife here. You don't have to hit on the girls, please. But the bottom line is that our students are eager. So they want this and they see the academic value, and honestly, they really want to get involved. So for the international educator, I think it's our role to ensure that we help them navigate those challenges in whatever means necessary. And sometimes that may be dealing with frustrating issues in a resilient way and being flexible with our partners, and also communicating to our partners that we need their flexibility as well.
Yeah, so speaking about challenges, I mean, there is, you know, I'm sure all three of us could list out quite a few other kinds of challenges that we've had. But some of the sorts of things are things like just the logistics of setting it up. If it's the first time that you're working with another partner on something, systems of institutions are different. And navigating that system to make sure everybody is aligned with what they need to do academically in order to infuse the COIL, that can be a barrier to start with. It can be a barrier to have different approaches to the pedagogy, and if the faculty members aren't willing to come together and be synergistic about it, that can be a challenge. Likewise, if they're not having similar global mindsets of how they'd approach it, if and when there are power differences of positionality, if those that are holding more power in spaces don't say, I need to approach this with a more equitable lens and figure out what we can do to make sure that this is an equitable project, it becomes really problematic. And we're replicating and recreating similar power dynamics that we already have, right? Particularly when you're looking at north-south kinds of collaborations, which tend to be north-dominant and north-led, right? So how can we get those faculty members to consider how we equitably engage in those sorts of things, right? And Davinia pointed out a number of sort of student aspect things, and we could go down lots of rabbit holes. But just setting up a first COIL does take some extra work. It does, because it's, especially if you've never done it before, one side might have faculty support in terms of an international office where they've done all sorts of different COILs, and another might be an institution that's never done a COIL before, right? Those sorts of things, and they don't have anybody else to turn to inside their own institution for that kind of support. So there are these things that are challenges and barriers that it's not just, let's go and do it, it's gonna happen. But looking at the research, looking at the anecdotal evidence, the assessment, it's so powerful, it's so transformative that it's worth the extra time putting into it. And I think that particularly for a faculty member, if you're an instructor in here and you're thinking about running a COIL, yes, the first one's gonna be challenging. And you might come back saying, that was enough, I'm just gonna do that one. But when you do it again, that's when you change your pedagogy. You make the updates and like, oh, here's how I'm gonna tweak it. Second time running it, much easier. Third time running it, you're a pro by that time, right? But it is challenging. I don't think any of us want to be up here saying that it's just, you know, easy to do the first time. It takes some extra effort. But having institutional supports built in at some centralized level with connections across the institution, particularly with teaching and learning offices, but other officers around the campus, creates a network of people that are invested and interested in this sort of thing. So there are real challenges, and I think that there's real potential for solutions as long as there's some top support and bottom grassroots interest.
Tom, there's one aspect that I want to raise. I think we should no longer take the issues of academic freedom for granted. There has been an assault on academic freedom across the world, even in established democracies where you wouldn't expect it. It just doesn't come from repressive regimes any longer. So we should actually see that challenge as one that is a real one, but not insurmountable. So we've had to deal with parts of the world that are currently in conflict. We've had to deal with states in the US where there's been a pushback on, issues of social justice and diversity. So we also have to recognize that challenge and work in ways to overcome that challenge so that we are not losing a viable partnership because of that challenge. The recent Academic Freedom Index that was released is scary, where there are so many countries in the world that are falling foul of basic academic freedom principles.
No, I mean, I think on that note, maybe let me turn to the audience because this is interesting because there's this dimension that is being added to the conversation that education and perhaps even the teaching and learning project in and of itself doesn't operate in a vacuum. That there are always these political dimensions that you navigate, and they become complex when you're working cross-border, different countries, trying to integrate and work with colleagues who may not necessarily have the same value systems, or that there may be political developments in those contexts that don't necessarily align with the direction of where you are located. Colleagues, let me pause at this stage and invite you to engage with the panel. We've got about, I want to say, 10-15 minutes before the end of the session, so any questions at this stage to the panel, welcome. We'll start with Prof. James, and we'll come this side, and 3. Thank you.
So, I'm not sure if it's a statement or question. Anyway, I am enthralled with being engaged in any COIL, and there are different types based on the nature and also the whole underpinning of what is the purpose of it. So, when one is thinking about working with the COIL, from the outset, it's about how all parties actually come together to develop the purpose and the vision with regard to it. And I hear what you were saying just now when you spoke about it not being outside of a module. It depends on the nature of the COIL and what then is feasible within the particular context that you find yourself in. If you think about it, we've just completed one with University of Zululand, Harvest University in Bruges, Belgium, and ourselves, and it was with foundation phase students. Now, staff, foundation phase, had their plans. It's like, no. So, okay, if we're going to do it, we'll do it through community engagement. And that's what we did, both in Unizul and with us. And we wanted to see, so how's it going to work? And it worked. Obviously, the students, there is assessment. Sorry, I'm just sharing now. There is assessment, and what is important here is that it was not part of the module. Our students' times, they commit, sign everything, and then sometimes don't come to the lecture. And I think that's one of the aspects within the COIL is the commitment from the student groups who are then present or not present. One of the comments that the student, because we 30, so it was 90, we had the whole plan. And one of the comments the student said, a young woman, she just said, I am learning so much from everybody in our group, because the students were in groups of 6. And I think that was the encouragement for all of it as well. And our focus was ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, in the foundation phase. So I just think that COIL is the way to go in every single module that one is doing. That's your semester assignment for the students. Don't see it as different. I see it as part of. So yeah, thank you.
Very interesting comment. And maybe we'll take 3, and then I'll ask you to respond. And yeah, wonderful. Please go ahead, yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Amanda from School of Education. Thank you, Prof. You spoke about the pedagogy of the heart presentation. I want to ask, how can we implement the pedagogy of the heart in one of the modules that we can opt for? And what tools or methods we can use to implement the pedagogy of the heart? Because you did mention about the pedagogy of the music. So,
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is it working at
come on now.
Okay, then
have a second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Prof. No, it's fine.
Thank you, Chair. I'm so excited about this concept. I think it came at the right time when there is a lot of confusion in the sector, which is higher education, when we talk about the concept of decoloniality, colonization, colonizing curriculum. And I think this concept is going to be able to address the issue of sociology of knowledge, because we tend to confuse this concept where we say there's an African epistemology, there's a European epistemology. Knowledge is knowledge. You can't separate. If this is a head, it's a head. So I think if we collaborate, and then the concept of collaboration has been emphasized in higher education, but how it is emphasized, students were left out in the concept of collaboration. So now this concept talks to collaboration, us and as well as students, because it's only us who are benefiting in the collaboration. And even the collaboration, how it is conceptualized in higher education is more into research. So I think this concept will really help us to find ways on knowledge integration. For instance, when we design the curriculum, we tend to separate African perspective, European perspective. But if I'm co-designing the curriculum with someone from Asia, someone from Europe, we'll find a space to integrate these perspectives. And our students will benefit, European students, African students will also benefit, because we'll be in a position to address this segregation of knowledge, I think.
Thank you very much. Panel members, the comments, you can take any of the questions or comments and you.
Yes, so maybe let me start responding to that. I think you make some excellent points. I think there have been barriers to contributing to the body of knowledge, which is why we've had this splintered view that we need to have a special form of European knowledge and African knowledge. And I think COIL actually helps that integration of knowledge. We certainly take indigenous knowledge into that space. We certainly provide a platform for local knowledge to be taken onto that global stage. And in internationalization, we're talking more and more about pluriform perspectives in the curriculum. We've equally used COIL to decolonize the curriculum. And we find that COIL actually allows us to engage with other institutions in decolonizing. And there are always questions about decolonization. Does it run counter to internationalization? Absolutely not. For me, decolonization calls for deeper and broader internationalization, bringing to the fore voices that have been at the periphery, that have been silenced before. And this is how we actually use COIL to drive that. And decolonization should never be a narrow national project. It's a broad global movement that needs to involve the colonizer as much as those that have been colonized. Imagine us decolonizing ourselves, yet the colonial powers actually have not shifted. So I always talk about COIL as that opportunity for us to be storytellers. There's a beautiful African proverb that goes, for as long as the lion does not have a storyteller, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. We need to be those storytellers, challenging dominant paradigms like we heard in the last presentation, shaping new narratives, retelling the past, and reimagining the future. COIL allows us to do that.
If I can maybe just add to what Dr. Samuels is saying, and also answer the question about pedagogy of the heart or even humanizing pedagogy. COIL allows the empowerment and the self-determination, placing the student in the driving seat of their learning, and also placing them in a space to teach their peers from their own perspective and context. The COIL principles promotes the creation of brave spaces, but also safe spaces for our students to build their confidence and recognize the value of their knowledge as well, and lift that up within these spaces. An example with our partner Anna John National University in the West Bank, we have a project called Freedom Dreams to understand the similarities between Palestine and South African apartheid through the lens of media censorship, using art to communicate our human experiences and those stories that has been talking about. So using those kinds of activities to bring students together to understand each other's context, but also then create dialogue within those, you know. And you can even use AI within COIL, you know, because there's disparities within the AI spaces also. So in 2 different countries, we put in a similar question. We asked it to spit out, but then we asked the students to use that and then do a comparative literature review and then talk to each other, keeping that humanistic element in mind.
And I'd add to that often when we're talking about COIL, these sort of things, people that are really fascinated in doing COIL tend to be maybe in a social science or humanistic space. But one of our most successful COILs was between a math department and an engineering department. And here's the reason that it comes to a heart-centered pedagogy or a human-based pedagogy. Because if you're going to do a COIL and you're really going to be successful at it, you've got the content aspect of it, where you're teaching the students global perspectives on how to solve something that's problematic, right? From different disciplinary or similar disciplinary lenses, which you do that sort of content as you would do in your base course anyway. But the real magic for me in COIL is thinking about getting students to reflect on the process of connecting across cultural lines. Getting them to stop at the end of the course or somewhere in the course and do a self-reflection of what it was like to actually engage in that process. Because often what happens in our coursework, even if we're at our home institution, we have a multicultural class, we do the work and then we leave. We don't actually talk about what it was like to work across difference in any sort of ways or assume similarities. And one of the really keys to COIL is having them reflect and think about what was it like to work across them. In part so that they don't go away if they had a negative experience in some way of saying, oh, I don't want to work with those people again, whatever it might be. But it brings in that opportunity to really be heart-centered rather than just saying, okay, we did this collaborative thing and now we're gone. You're giving that opportunity for them to reflect and think about it, and the reflection component is really critical to making the COIL something different than just people getting together and talking, for me.
I'm going to maybe give the audience one last opportunity if there's anyone who wants to ask a question before I ask the panel to conclude. But just one thing that keeps on going on in my mind is this idea of COIL being like an equalizer. You know, when we think about international education, historically it's been about money, who has the money. All of a sudden that idea goes away in some ways, not completely, but in some ways. Yeah. And it's about how do we collaborate, how to build this systems of understanding that destabilize some of these power relations, the knowledge, you know, avenues that we've been talking about. Colleagues, any last question that you may have or comment that you'd like to make? I don't see any. So I think the audience is quite happy, panel members, so maybe let me give you an opportunity to conclude And in concluding, to think about what is the future of COIL as you see it in higher education. Perhaps what are some of the resources that you think colleagues would need to take forward this idea of COIL? Shall I start with you, Dr. Getting-Gallester?
Sure. In thinking about the future of COIL, I think it's dependent on us making sure that there's more development in the field, broadly. And things like AfriCoil coming online, IVAC, and other sort of bodies that have already done some of this field development work are really terrific. But I think we need to make sure that we cultivate within other institutions that are in our region or beyond the capacity to flex around COIL, because it needs to become a conversation that when we start walking up to people and having that conversation, they don't know what we're talking about. They've heard of this idea of COIL, but they're not really sure what it is. There's a capacity building need, I think, and it's across the academy, right? Just like we have capacity building for researchers, and most universities have researchers, right? That's one of the things that makes them universities or colleges. But we have to do the same for COIL. We have to have that development component. And so the future of COIL, if we have that development component as well, it translates into the faculty members taking those same capacities for heart-centered pedagogies, intercultural learning into their other classrooms, regardless of whether they're doing a COIL or not, right? So it turns them into more inclusive instructors beyond just the COIL. So I think that there's a lot of work to do. I think there's some decline in interest in certain areas in COIL because we're post-pandemic, which really is what lifted COIL up. It had been going on for forever, you know, years before that, 20, 30 years before that, there were COIL projects going on, but not at scale. And the COVID pandemic really created some things more at scale. Now we don't have that anymore, and there's a little bit of less interest in certain institutions. It's still strong in areas, but there's some decline. So I do think that there's opportunities for field development and making sure that people know the transformative power in nature. And we need to be able to show that in research, in data, and in development.
Well, for me, there are 3 points. One is for COIL to grow and to succeed, we need to broaden the collaborations. We need for networks to come together, for parts of the world that are not involved to come on board. And I think that's important at an international level. But I really want to put this challenge out, that we need collaboration at a local level as well. One of the reasons the 4 Cape universities do so well in attracting funding, in advancing their missions, is because they work together. They are competitive but equally collaborative. We need, in KZN, to take up that challenge and actually strengthen each of us through collaboration. And that goes beyond COIL. So that's a challenge, and Thabo, you now at a level where you can take that forward in a more effective way than some of us. So I'll leave that challenge with you. The second is the area of leadership. We have a dearth of leadership in the world. You look at the political leadership. I mean, the US is having an election next week. There are millions of people that are supporting a candidate that is questionable at best. We've seen that in the UK, 4 prime ministers in 1 year. We've seen dearth of leadership in our own country. What are we as universities doing to address that leadership gap? For me, we have a pivotal role in shaping the next generation of leaders. Not just Mandelas and Tutus, we certainly need them, but we need leaders at every level and sphere of society. That nurse practitioner that impacts on the health of an entire community, that principal that you are going to train, that you would have trained in your previous faculty, Thabo, who is not just a leader within a school, but impacts on an entire community and changes that. The medical scientist who changes the lives of millions because of their leadership and vision. That is our role at universities to change. Equally, our academics should become leaders in society and take that role. So the second is leadership. And the third is transformation more broadly and our impact of society. So I want to paraphrase something that Nelson Mandela said to us: education is the great engine of personal development. And I will paraphrase that to say international education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that the daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, that the son of a mine worker can become the head of a mine, that the child of a farm worker can become the president of a great nation. We need to be at the forefront of that great engine. Thank you.
Well, that's definitely difficult to follow, but I'll give it a go. I think just from a grassroots level and from a coordinator's level, I think I was very lucky to come into DUT when I did after the 12 years of work in building that grassroots level up and top-down support structure, thanks to, it was there. So my job was really, I won't say easy, but to take COIL and broader international virtual exchange to scale, I had the enabling environment. But what I have learned is that, and I think all of us should consider, is that the university environment and ecosystem is ever changing. We talk about leadership and leadership changing and the need for leadership. I think that this buy-in is cyclical. And for us, if we want to get into this transformative way of teaching and learning, it's important to have that understanding and accept that understanding that, that's something that is going to happen in a cycle. And sometimes it's frustrating, but you need to be resilient to ensure that there's that sustainability within your university as well. I think with AfriCOIL coming into the fore, we don't just see this with teaching and learning collaboration. Our bibliometric analysis has shown that South Africa is not a very good neighbor in terms of collaboration. And I think, we all talk about being African universities in our missions and our values. In fact, recently on the IVLP program with Dr. Kudakwashe from the African University in Zimbabwe, I always asked him, what makes your university the African university? And his answer is that we have a Pan-African outlook. But my question to him was, how many partners do you have on the continent? And they're building that. So, I think a network like AfriCOIL is definitely something that's going to show change. And I think lastly I want to say is, as much as we're seeing COIL as a pedagogy, I think in our context, COIL is also a mindset, and it's a movement that's happening. And it's a movement to transform the oppressive nature that our universities in South Africa and other global South countries have been built upon, right? So joining that movement, I think, would be the challenge that I would bring to everyone there.
Colleagues, let me take this opportunity to thank our panel for an enlightening conversation. Very, very well done indeed. We are dead on time, but the difficulty is that I think the other room is still, they're moving now. Okay, so let us wait for a couple more minutes to get for them to come here. I think Professor Thea van der Westhuizen is chairing this session, and then we can then have the follow-up session. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you to the panel members. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.